The acceptance letter sat on my desk for 3 days before I told them. I wanted to savor it alone first. 4 years at Stanford, full scholarship, my ticket out of the suffocating mediocrity of our suburban existence. When I finally told my parents at dinner, my mother nodded absently while scrolling through her phone, and my father asked if Stanford had a good golf course nearby. That should have been my first warning. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. But I was 18 and optimistic, convinced that their indifference was simply their way. My parents had never been demonstrative, but they were reliable. They paid the bills, showed up to graduation, and maintained the facade of a functional family. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. The summer before college, my father's business partner absconded with $2 million. The scandal was swift and devastating. My father's construction company collapsed within weeks. My mother, who had never worked a day in her life, descended into a depression so profound she barely left her bedroom. The house that had seemed like our fortress became a prison of financial ruin and emotional decay. I remember the conversation with startling clarity. I was packing for Stanford, rolling my clothes into my suitcase with the careless enthusiasm of someone who believed their future was secure. My mother appeared in my doorway, thinner than I'd ever seen her, her silk pajamas hanging like curtains on her frame. "We need to talk about college," she said, her voice thin as tissue paper. I knew before she finished. Parents always know. I just didn't want to accept it. "We can't afford it," she continued, not meeting my eyes. "Not now. Your father says you need to defer. Get a job, help us through this. You can go next year, or the year after that, once things stabilize." "But I have a full scholarship," I said, the words sounding hollow even as I spoke them. "Your scholarship doesn't cover living expenses, housing, food, books. We were going to help with that, but we can't. Your father says—" She stopped, wringing her hands. "He says it's selfish of you to abandon us now, when we need you most." That word, selfish, lodged itself in my chest like a bullet. Selfish. As if my own future was a betrayal of theirs. I should have gone anyway. I was 18. I should have packed my bags, driven to Stanford, found a way to make it work. But I was young, and they were my parents, and they had raised me to believe that family loyalty superseded all other considerations. So I deferred. I got a job at a grocery store for $9.50 an hour and handed most of my paychecks to my mother. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, which suddenly felt like a cell. Months passed, then a year, then 3 years. My parents made vague promises about next year, about how things would improve, about how grateful they were for my sacrifice, but they never improved. My father took on increasingly desperate construction jobs, working 12-hour days and coming home, silent and furious. My mother started drinking wine at noon. The house grew shabby around us, the lawn unmowed, the paint peeling. We were a family in freefall, and I was the only thing tethering them to anything. During those 3 years, I watched my high school friends graduate from college. I watched them get jobs and apartments and lives. I watched them move forward while I remained suspended in amber, frozen at 18, my Stanford acceptance letter yellow and brittle in a drawer. I took community college courses at night, but it wasn't the same. I was tired all the time. I was angry in a way I couldn't articulate. And my parents, instead of being grateful for my sacrifice, began to resent me for it. My mother made comments about how I was wasting my potential, how I should have been more resourceful. My father said nothing, but the way he looked at me, with a mixture of disappointment and contempt, was somehow worse. On my 21st birthday, they gave me a card signed by both of them. Inside, in my mother's careful handwriting, "You'll figure it out. You always do." That was when I stopped believing in them. I spent the next 2 years working double shifts and attending night classes with a ferocity that surprised even me. I paid for everything myself. When I finally had enough money saved, I moved into a tiny apartment with 2 roommates and enrolled full-time at the local state university. It wasn't Stanford, but it was something. It was mine. My parents didn't understand. When I told them I was moving out, my mother cried. My father said I was being ungrateful, that I was abandoning them just like they'd feared. The guilt they tried to heap on me was suffocating, but I was done. I was done being the daughter who sacrificed her future for their failures. I was done being the family scapegoat. I finished my degree in business administration. I got a job at a marketing firm. I built a life from nothing, through sheer force of will and an anger that burned like a pilot light in my chest. I moved to the city. I got promoted. I started making real money. And I never went home. I spoke to my mother twice a year, brief, cordial calls that felt like performance art. My father I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. They sent me Christmas cards, which I opened and immediately recycled. They were strangers to me now, but worse than strangers. They were the architects of my wasted years, the reason I was 4 years behind my peers, the reason I had spent my early 20s working retail instead of building my career. The invitation came on a Tuesday. It arrived at my office in a cream-colored envelope that screamed old money and country club pretense, the reunion gala. 35 years of the class of 1989 coming together to celebrate time's passage and their own endurance. My parents wanted to relive their glory days, I assumed, back when they were young and beautiful and hadn't yet failed at everything. For 3 weeks, I didn't respond. I told myself I would throw it away. I told myself it was beneath me to attend. But something festered in me, something dark and articulate that whispered a different kind of possibility. What if I showed up looking like a success? What if they saw me thriving, not despite them, but because I had learned to survive without them? What if I let them see what they had tried to destroy and failed? It wasn't a healthy impulse, I knew that. But it was irresistible. I bought a dress that cost more than I used to make in a week. Black, floor length, utterly elegant. I had my hair professionally done. I hired a car service. I spent the entire drive to the venue rehearsing a version of myself that was poised, accomplished, and completely untouched by their betrayal. A version of myself that was, in almost every way, a lie. The venue was the grand ballroom at the Riverside Country Club, the same place where they had gotten married, I realized, where they had probably started planning their children's lives before they even existed, the same place where they had felt invincible. I stood in the doorway, watching them before they saw me. My mother was holding court with a group of women, her laugh a little too loud, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. She had aged significantly. There were lines around her mouth that makeup couldn't quite cover, and her blonde hair had been dyed and dyed again until it had the straw-like quality of something artificial. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished. My father stood across the room, talking to someone I didn't recognize. He had gone mostly gray, and there was a softness to him now, a dissipation that came from years of quiet failure. But he was still smiling, still playing the game, still pretending. I walked into the ballroom with the kind of confidence that only comes from having nothing left to lose. It took them a moment to recognize me. I watched the confusion flicker across my mother's face first, then gradual recognition. She excused herself from her conversation and made her way toward me, my father trailing behind her, both of them moving with the careful uncertainty of people who had been blindsided. "Sarah?" My mother's voice was tentative, hopeful. Is that really you? We didn't think you were coming. I almost didn't, I said, and I smiled, the kind of smile that revealed nothing. But I realized that I wanted to reconnect with where I came from, the people who shaped me. My father looked at me with something like suspicion. You look well, he said, the words careful. I do, don't I? I agreed. I'm the VP of Marketing at Harrison and Associates. I just closed a deal worth $3.5 million. I have an apartment in the city with a view of the skyline. I'm doing quite well for someone who had to give up 4 years of her life to help her family through a rough patch. I watched the words hit them like slaps. My mother's smile froze. My father's jaw tightened. Sarah, that's not fair, my mother began. You know we never wanted you to sacrifice. Sacrifice? I laughed, and it sounded sharp in my own ears. Is that what we're calling it? Because I remember it differently. I remember you telling me it was selfish to go to Stanford. I remember spending 4 years of my life working at a grocery store for minimum wage so you could keep your house. I remember missing out on experiences, on friendships, on the chance to figure out who I was before I was buried under the weight of your failure. People were starting to notice. I could feel the careful attention of nearby guests, the subtle shift of energy. My mother glanced around nervously. Can we not do this here? She whispered. Why not? I asked, my voice pleasant and cutting. Isn't this what reunions are about? Reconnecting? Being honest? I'm being honest. I'm telling you that you hurt me in a way that took me years to recover from. I'm telling you that you asked me to choose between my future and you, and I chose you, and you never forgave me for resenting you for that choice. My father's face had gone very still. You got your education, he said quietly. You're successful now. You got what you wanted. Eventually, I said. After you decided you could afford to let me go. After I had figured out how to make it work on my own. After I had spent years being angry and ashamed and watching my peers move forward without me. Do you have any idea what that was like? Do you understand what you did? My mother was crying now, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. We did the best we could, she whispered. No, I said, and there was no anger in my voice anymore, just a kind of terrible clarity. You did the minimum. You asked me to sacrifice my future instead of sacrificing anything yourselves. You could have gotten a second job. You could have taken out loans. You could have been honest with me and let me make my own choice. But instead, you made me responsible for your failure, and you have never acknowledged how deeply wrong that was. The silence between us felt like a chasm. Around us, the reunion continued. People laughed and clinked glasses and pretended not to notice our personal apocalypse. I came tonight, I continued, to show you that I survived it. That despite you, despite your betrayal, I built a life. I became someone. But I also came to tell you that I'm done. I'm done being the daughter you can blame. I'm done pretending that what you did was acceptable. I'm done waiting for an apology that will never come because you don't believe you owe me one. I took a step back, away from them. I hope you enjoyed your reunion. I hope it was worth it. I left before they could respond, walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air, my borrowed sophistication cracking like ice beneath the intensity of what had just happened. I got into the car service and asked the driver to take me home, and as we pulled away from the country club, I watched the building recede in the rearview mirror, taking with it the last of my illusions about reconciliation. That was 6 months ago. I haven't spoken to either of my parents since that night. My mother tried calling repeatedly in the weeks afterward, but I didn't answer. My father didn't try at all. Eventually, the calls stopped, and the silence between us settled into something almost comfortable, an acknowledgement that there was nothing left to say. I expected to feel triumphant. I had imagined for so long what it would be like to confront them, to make them see what they had done to me, to force them to reckon with their own culpability. But standing in that ballroom, speaking those words, I realized that revenge was a smaller thing than I had believed. It was hollow and exhausting, and it didn't repair anything. What I had done was burn down the last remaining bridge between us. What I had done was ensure that there would be no reconciliation, no eventual understanding, no deathbed forgiveness. I had spoken my truth, and in doing so, I had severed the last thread that tied me to them. But here's the thing they don't tell you about revenge: it doesn't actually make you feel better. It doesn't heal the wound. It just means you're never going to get the apology you deserved, because you've made it clear that there's no path forward that leads anywhere but to the grave. I think about them sometimes. I wonder if they talk about that night. I wonder if my mother tells her friends that her daughter showed up at a reunion to humiliate them. I wonder if my father replays the conversation in his head, trying to understand when exactly he had lost me. The truth is, he lost me the moment he told me it was selfish to leave. I have built a good life. I have money and success and professional respect. I have friends who know nothing about where I come from. I have freedom from the constraints of family obligation. But I also have this: a carefully maintained distance from everyone who might hurt me. A reluctance to trust that goes bone deep. A fear that if I let someone close enough, they will eventually ask me to sacrifice everything, and I will have to choose between them and myself all over again. That's the real cost of what happened. Not the 4 years I lost, not the money I didn't make, not the education I deferred. It's the way I learned to be alone, even in the presence of other people. It's the way I learned that family was conditional, that love was conditional, that nothing was permanent except disappointment. I showed up at that reunion expecting to feel empowered. Instead, I feel like I'm still that 21-year-old, angry and betrayed, walking away from the only people who were supposed to have my back. I feel like I gave them one last gift, the opportunity to see how much I succeeded despite them, and then I left them with nothing. Which is exactly what they gave me. My therapist asked me recently if I thought I would ever reconcile with my parents. I told her no. She asked me if I thought I would regret that choice, and I realized, sitting in that office with afternoon light streaming through the windows, that I already did. Not because I wanted them back in my life, but because I had spent so much energy hating them that I never bothered to learn how to love anyone else. That's the real revenge they got on me, in the end. That's the damage that will outlast any confrontation, any well-timed performance, any moment of justified fury. They taught me that love was dangerous, that family was a liability, that it was safer to be alone. And I learned the lesson so well that I've spent the last 6 months, the last year really, proving it. I don't know if there's a way to undo that. I don't know if there's a way to trust again, to be vulnerable, to believe that someone won't abandon me the moment things get hard. I know that I can't fix my parents. I know that they probably can't fix themselves. And I know that coming to that reunion, speaking those words, didn't actually fix anything. It just made the ending official. Sometimes I think about calling my mother. I imagine picking up the phone and hearing her voice again, and I wonder if there's something I missed, some version of reconciliation that doesn't require me to pretend that what happened didn't hurt. But then I remember the way she looked at me that night, confused and small, and I realize that there isn't a good version of this story. There's just the version where they failed me, and the version where I make myself successful anyway, and the version, the one I'm living now, where I'm successful and alone, unable to forgive, but also unable to forget. I used to think that being able to let go of anger was a sign of strength. Now I think that holding on to it might be the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. Because beneath the rage, beneath the righteousness, beneath the carefully constructed narrative of triumph over adversity, there's still that 18-year-old girl who just wanted her parents to believe in her the way she believed in them. And that girl is still waiting for an apology that will never come, still hoping that someday they'll understand what they did. The reunion happened in April. It's November now. I haven't looked at the photos that were posted online. I don't know what anyone said about me after I left. I've built a wall so carefully around that night that sometimes I forget it happened at all. But mostly, I remember. And mostly, I regret. Not the leaving, not the calling them out on their choices, not the demand for accountability. I regret that somewhere along the way, I learned to survive by cutting off the possibility of being hurt. I regret that I spent so much time preparing for revenge that I forgot to prepare for the aftermath. I regret that I thought showing up looking like a success would be the same as feeling like one. Because the truth is, I'm still not whole. I'm still not healed. I'm still that abandoned girl in an expensive dress, trying to convince myself that spite is a substitute for love. And it never will be.